Started. Thank you for joining us tonight for Bible study, and we are going to be in a bunch of different places, not just one tonight, and try to figure out some things and try to study together. And some of the hardest questions, some of you all might say that being a pastor is one of the easiest jobs around, and that you can just you have freedom, and you can go, you're out on the golf course and you're just doing this, you'd be eating chicken all the time and doing all these kind of things, and that's what pastors do. But I'll tell you, in the last week, it's been one of those things that my friend Randy says, I wouldn't trade jobs with you for $1 million, and he's the CEO of his own x-ray company. So he said, what you do is just, I don't even want to think about it. And I was like, yeah, when you're sitting across from, okay, so let me say this. Let me start with prayer. Dear Lord, I ask that you'd touch my lips with a coal of fire from the altar of heaven, Lord, and let me be forgiven, and just fill me with your Holy Spirit. Fill all of us here and prepare our hearts and minds. Fill us with the Holy Spirit in such a way that we can understand the Bible tonight, that it all makes sense to us, and let it all bring you glory and produce fruit for you. In Jesus' name, amen. So I got a call 5 years ago. I guess, no, it's been longer than that, because the memory just came up on my phone. It was on my computer. It was 9 years ago. As I got a call from one of the church members of where I was serving, and I was the associate pastor at this church. I just started back at my home church, and it was a grandfather on one line, and he said, I need you to meet me at the church. And I said, okay, I'll be glad to. I'll be glad to meet you over at the church. And he goes, no, my wife and I are going to go get our granddaughters from school. One is 15, one's 13, I think was how old they were at the time. And he said, my daughter was murdered today. And the guy who killed her stabbed her over 50 times. And he has taken their stepsister, who was only, how old was she, Jill? 3 years old. And he has fled the state, and he is on the run with this 3-year-old little girl. And I don't know what to say to my granddaughters, so would you say it? They don't know. They're at school right now. And so I said, absolutely. And I said, did you call our pastor? And he's like, no, will you call him? I said, yep. And so the pastor and I met them over there at the church, and we were there. We had probably, 15 minutes to kind of gather our thoughts before they arrived and talk. And he said, I'm just going to let you handle it, and I'll jump in if I need to. And I said, okay. And so the 2 girls came in not knowing anything. They just walked into the pastor's office. Grandma and Grandpa had come and gotten them from school. They had no clue why in the middle of the day they'd come and got them. And so they sat down, and I had to explain that news to them. And that was a horrific thing. That's wailing. When you see that word wailing, and then it says in the Bible they were weeping, you'll know that sound when you hear it. And so those are the things that we experience sometimes and have to deal with as pastors. But it's not just me. You all have to experience that in your lives. There are situations where you yourself have been weeping and wailing in those moments. So we're going to try to answer the question, why does this stuff happen to us? Why do we, because there's people today who are, because Carmen passed away this afternoon, trying to deal with why somebody so young, somebody that was a Christian, somebody that was a nurse and then a doctor, valedictorian of her high school, and married, and just a good person. Why does something like this happen to them with kids in middle school age, and trying to make sense of it all? So, let's try to look at some of those. Everybody turn to Ecclesiastes 3. So Solomon, if we're going to, the words of Jesus, he's the wisest guy in the Bible, wisest man in the Bible. And Solomon would be second. Of course, Jesus is son of God, right? The son of God. Solomon was the son of David. And he writes, remember what we said is all these people would come to hear his wisdom, to ask him questions. And Ecclesiastes is kind of at the end of his life. love all of it that he says, but he's definitely looking back on life and saying, this is what I experienced in all that I saw that went on. So chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes, and you're going to say, oh, this is a song I know, right? Because they have a song, every season, turn kind of deal. And so, but let's look at this. This is the guy that God said, what can I give you? And he said, wisdom. And this is his response to some of the questions, the deep questions of life. And he says in verse 1, so Ecclesiastes 3:1, I'm not asking you to spell Ecclesiastes, just turn there. It says, there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot. And I'm going to stop right there, because for us, we read that passage and it's God speaking to us saying, there's a time that you're going to be born and there's a time that you're going to die. There is a set time. And are there examples in the Bible where it seems like somebody's time got extended? Like there was, we used to play video games in a video arcade. No such thing exists today. But I take that back. There's a place that we went with the youth down in Nashville, kind of off Thompson Lane. That's nothing but just old-time video games and pinball machines, and it's fantastic. Great place. But we used to stand and feed quarters into these arcade games, and what you hoped was that you got to the end of the game and they give you extended play. That you had done so well that you got extended play. You got more time on this game. And there are some examples in the Bible of that. And there's some examples like King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah gets sick and he prays and he has other people pray. And God says, I'm going to extend your life by this many years, right? He gives him some extended play, some extended time. You have the stories in Luke, like Luke 7, where Jesus is walking down the street and he's in his own parade of people, right? And in their kind of cross street, there's a funeral going by. And a woman is going with her only son. She's a widow. Her only son is I imagine, in a casket, but it's probably not a casket. It's just whatever they're carrying him on to go bury him. And Jesus goes over in the middle of that because she is wailing and weeping, and he puts his hand on that child who's dead. He's at the funeral. I mean, they're doing the procession, and he lays hands on him, and he is raised from the dead. The widow at Nain is what that's called. It's where she lived. And so Jesus heals him, gives him some extended time, right? Extended play, because he was dead and then raised from the dead by Jesus. You have that, who had a big stone that got rolled away? Well, some of y'all go, Jesus, right? But no, we're talking about Lazarus, right? John 11. Yeah, 4 days he's been in there. So, and Jesus says, roll that stone away, come forth Lazarus, right? And they're like, no, don't roll the stone away. He stinketh by now, right? That's the King James. He stinketh. And he gets extended play. He gets extended time, right? And he is raised from the dead. And so there are examples of people being healed from whatever affliction that they had. And Jesus did a lot of that while he walked the earth. But there are examples in the Bible of other people healing people. You had Peter healing Aeneas, and you had Paul healing, and those are resurrections. Let me take that back. Peter healed Dorcas, Tabitha, and she was dead, and they had washed her body, covered her with spices, and laid her in an upper room for everybody to come by and see her. And then Paul raises Eutychus, who fell out of a third-floor window while Paul was preaching. He fell asleep, much like you people do when I preach, No, that's not true. But he falls out of a window, and Paul raises him from the dead. So extended play again. But we're trying to figure out, why doesn't God do that all the time? Why does he only do it sometimes? And that's the part that's toughest for people who are laying in a cancer ward or an ICU or sitting at a funeral, is they're trying to figure out why this time but not this time. And so if I'm talking to somebody, then I will say, the part that we struggle with, did anybody have a problem with Fonda passing away at 97 years old? No. Most people lived a long, full life, right? My grandfather lived to be 90, and when he turned 90, he said, I don't really like it that I've lived this long, because I've outlived all my friends, co-workers. I've buried my wife. I've buried my son. I've lived too long. I've got, aches and pains that I would like to get rid of kind of deal. So the actual length of somebody's life is what we have a problem with. Because if they die as a, little Caleb that died when I was preaching at the Brush Hill Church was only 7 days old, and he passed away, and everybody said, what a travesty, what a tragedy that he passed away. But if somebody's 95, then they're like, I lived a long, full life, right? That kind of thing. So we take issue with that Carmen was this age, or that's, you know what I mean? It's that, and has kids of this age. And so we try to figure that out. Let's look at one other passage just about that, a time to be born, a time to die kind of thing. Look with me in Psalm 89, Psalm 89 is where we got the name Ethan for our son. Our third son is named Ethan. And this is written by Ethan. I know some of y'all thought David wrote all the Psalms, but this one's actually written by Ethan. I think it's Maskilite, I think Ezraite. Ezraite, a Maskil by Ethan, the Ezraite.
I don't know.
So it's Psalm 89, and it's verse 48. And let's read 47 and 48 together. So it's 89, 47, and 48. So Psalms is basically right in the middle of the Bible. 119 is right in the middle. But, you're looking for Psalm 89, 47, and 48. It says, remember how fleeting is my life. For what futility you have created all humanity! ! Who can live and not see death? Or who can escape the power of the grave? The answer to that question is nobody. Is that every single person sitting here at some point in your life, your mom and dad will pass away. And then if they don't, then what happened? You passed away, right? I mean, most of us will bury our moms and dads and our grandparents. We might bury a child. We bury our siblings. That everybody, every single person dies. Now, there'll be people who are typing right now as fast as they can in the comments section to say, Enoch didn't die. Enoch didn't die in the Old Testament. He walked with God. Absolutely true, right? Elijah rode in the chariot of fire up into heaven. Yes, exactly. But 99.9% of us, we die. And so it is making that point that is going to happen, and it's just us trying to understand the time frame of it, right? Which is what is problematic for us. All right, so let's talk for just a second. If we can, I'm going to flip back over to Ecclesiastes. You don't. I just want to be there in terms of looking at some of the passages that are there. Okay, so for me, listen to this. Okay, so this is my life. You've heard some of these things, but I'm just going to quickly go through that, and you tell me and answer the question, why, right? I can only speak for me. I can tell you the story of Jill and Seela in a car wreck, but for me, I can tell you these are the things I've been through, and then answer the question, why? This is not my therapy. It's to help you understand. So, fell on an oil furnace when I was 2 years old. It scarred my stomach, right? You guys have heard that. Car door swung open as my mom was driving, and I held onto the door at 2 years old until she was able to stop the car. And this is the part where a lot of you start going, Chris's mother and father were really bad parents, right? That's what you start saying. I know that that's not necessarily true. I was in a car wreck with my dad. I told that story, right? Where I slammed into the dash. My dad was reaching for a cigarette that he had dropped in the floor. So ran us into a telephone pole. And I had 2 cysts on the back of my left knee that I had to have drained. That very painful experience. Had a large growth in my sinuses that had to be removed in the 6th grade. And they thought that was cancer until they got in there. And then it was a cyst. I had none of my baby teeth would come out. I had to have 8 of those pulled. And then I had to physically myself, because they threatened to pull them all, I had to physically be wiggling them all the time to try to get them out so I didn't have to go have them pulled. So 8 of these back teeth were all pulled out. That's not wisdom teeth. Those were baby teeth that had to come out before the others. I've had my eye cornea cut twice in the same eye with pieces of paper that people did that number and cut my eye. Dislocated my knee in the 9th grade where it turned sideways, made a T, right? We talked about that. I walked in on burglars at my house, came home after school one day, and burglars were in the house. My family owned guns, so I immediately left and went back out, not knowing what was going to happen. I got punched on the school bus in the 9th grade by a real small kid who was about this tall compared to me. And he punched me in the eye with me facing this way. He hit me this way where I couldn't see it coming, kind of sucker punch, because I had told him to stop picking on another kid that was in the back. And so he thought the next day at school it would be a good idea to bring a semi-automatic weapon to school. And they caught him with it in his locker in like first period. And he got expelled and sent to Florida to military school, which I thought was kind of interesting that he brought a weapon and they sent him to military school. But he was planning on shooting me in case I came at him. That was what he was going to do if I was looking for revenge. I can remember being, probably 8 or 9 years old and walking home from the swimming pool. We lived near a neighborhood swimming pool, and walking home from there on some main roads just down the shoulder. Kind of like a Carter's Creek kind of road. I hate to say it. But a guy pulling up, and I always called him the greasy stranger, pulled up and said, "Hey, do you all want to ride?" Because my babysitter was about a 17-year-old girl, and she had on a bikini top and then had a towel. And we were walking home, and she said, "Well, yeah, I'd love to get a ride home. This is about another mile to the house or whatever." And I went, "My parents said stranger danger. Don't go into the car with anybody or whatever." So we didn't get in the car. And I always was like, yeah, I'm not buried on the side of the road somewhere. I stayed out of the white panel van that went by. My grandmother bought me a skateboard. I pointed it straight down the hill that we lived on and went all the way just straight down, not going back and forth like you're supposed to, slaloming. And I just was going like 100 miles an hour straight. It wasn't that fast, but straight down the hill on this skateboard, and not thinking until I get to the bottom that there was a giant big pile of gravel down there that I hit and then tumbled and had to walk back up to get medical care. Ran a mini bike into a ditch at Camp Montvale. Just smashed it into a ditch. I had pneumonia 3 times in high school. Had the chicken pox at 18 years old, where my head swelled to double its size and was covered with sores. My Acura that I was in when I was in seminary was hit in the front. My Acura was hit from behind on Whispering Hills. My blue van was sideswiped on the side while I was driving it. My white van was hit by a drunk driver who was chasing his wife down the road. My Suburban, when I was driving, it was hit from behind by a teenager, which I love that story because my Suburban was not damaged at all, and it totaled his Saturn little car that he was in. There was not a scratch on my car. Our car. Sorry, Jill. And then again, you've heard me say that I was sick, and my doctor gave me Levaquin as to take as medicine, and I had an allergic reaction to that, and would have died if Jill hadn't come out in the garage and found me standing over there. And she goes, "You don't look good." And I went, it was that kind of deal. At Union, I explained last night when we were at People's Table that B and Steve Austell, we were doing a women's retreat we had about 100 ladies coming, and B and Steve were helping me cook. My mom and dad were helping me cook. Jill was on the way, and we had another couple of people volunteer-wise. And Steve was trying to make pancakes, and it has a caterpillar that's under. No, that's not the word. That's not caterpillar. What is it? It's the thing where you brown the top of stuff. What is that called? Salamander. Salamander that they had. And that's underneath the griddle, and that's where the pilot lights are for it. And Steve was trying to do this, and the pilot light had gone out. And I'm over here, and I'm stirring gravy, and we're making whatever, and we're doing all this kind of stuff. And he goes, "Hey, this is not hot. What do I do?" And I said, "Oh, pilot light's gone out." And I grabbed the lighter, and I went, boom, like this, and it went whoosh, and this big giant thing of fire came out, burned my hair back to here, all my eyebrows, all my eyelashes, all the hair in my nose. And they rushed me to the hospital with B praying over me. Jill says the only thing that happened from that is that I look 20 years younger. We'll let you make that determination. Was at the beach with my dad, standing out talking to him while my kids played in the water, and there were jellyfish that were surrounding us. We could not see. There were so many jellyfish that had washed in while we were standing there talking. Jill and Seela and I standing out in the ocean, and 2 sharks going between us and another lady that was there, doing a wedding in Ramsey's Cascades, and a big giant 600-pound bear going behind me while I stood there and did their wedding vows, and they shook in fear. The chimney blowing off my house, and in a big storm in Knoxville. Took my family to Pickett State Park State Park, and we were walking along a trail, and we were looking at all of these where they said that the Native Americans would live underneath these shelters. It's kind of rocks and then this sandy area underneath the rocks. And we were looking at all that, and the kids were playing, and they were like, golly, this is sand just like the ocean. And we were like, yeah. And we were trying to do a teachable moment and all those things. And then I said, now let's go over here. We'll get some ice cream or something like that. My kids walked this way, and we turned and walked about 5 feet that way. And an oak tree that's as big as the ones along our driveway went, and it fell completely, just straight down, just landed right where we had been standing. And I mean, that tree, I couldn't reach my arms around it. It was that big. And it fell right where my family was standing 30 seconds before that. And then, of course, when I went to Yellowstone, there was the 100-year flood that happened while we were out there. And of course, my famous story about being in a tent in Yellowstone, and when I stepped out that morning to have breakfast, that a buffalo was right here going, this kind of thing. He was taller than I was. So that's just one page of the stuff that has happened to Chris Caldwell in his lifetime. Now no insurer will ever talk to me again, right? No health insurance people will ever, listen to me. But I ask you the question, why? Why did those things happen? And most of the time, if I shared those stories and we were at a fellowship dinner, most of you all would be able to tell me stories similar to that of things that have happened to you throughout the years since you were... Jenny's going, not that, like that, not like that, right? Do it.
Is your nickname Lucky?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But so, I like to think now that this is not an explanation, but I like to think now that Satan knew who I was going to be and tried to kill me for about 30 years. You know what I mean? That's just kind of, and then of course some of y'all have said, it was the parenting that you got, the people in your life who were supposed to be taking care of you, that kind of thing. That's not it at all. And part of it, I think, also attributes back to just being the Ritalin kid that was always in trouble and just kind of doing stuff all the time, all those things. But the question we have to get back to is the why. Why does stuff like that happen? And so if we can try to trace some of that and try to kind of figure out, so we've already read the Ecclesiastes one, and remember we talked several weeks ago about another explanation would be, besides just it's our time to go, is the idea that God is sovereign. The idea that God can choose to have mercy on who he wants to, and he can have grace and give grace to those people that he wants to, and that we can't argue about that. Is that some cases when Jesus is walking down the street, it just broke his heart that this woman was crying the way she was, and all of us sitting here would say, probably earlier in the day there was some woman that was crying over somebody they lost, a man or a woman. And later that day, there was probably somebody else that was crying. And if we go tomorrow, Thursday, and we go to Oaks and Nichols and we go stand over there, there'll be a list of rooms where somebody is dying. And if I walk in any of those rooms, all different families, what am I going to find? Crying. And if we go on Friday and we go back, what do we find? Same thing. If we go Saturday, same thing. Is that every day there's people who are dying. And so why did Jesus in that one moment, and it's because God is sovereign and God can choose to do what he wants to because he's the creator of the universe. He made us, breathed life into us. We were dirt that he breathed the life into, right? So, and that's where we get at the end of Job, where, Job goes, I demand answers. I want answers. I mean, literally banging fist on the table kind of thing. And God says, who are you? Where were you when I created this and this and this and this? Tell me where the wind comes from. Tell me where the snow comes from. Tell me where the lightning comes from. Tell me, right? And he's kind of, and this is Job's response. Not kidding. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I apologize to you that I have misspoke. I shouldn't have done that. And that is actually the truth, right? All right, so let's look at another passage that if we're all we're using our Bible skills tonight. Look at Isaiah 57. And actually today, Sandy Bratton said, I am so glad that Suzanne Bruin put on her Facebook page one time, Isaiah 57:1, and because it's been helpful to her in so many different situations with family members that have passed away. Isaiah 57:1. And we're just trying to trace to why, right? And so it says, the righteous perish, So 57:1, I hear you turning, so that's great. I want you to turn there. I want you to be able to see it for yourselves. I'm sitting here trying to read it, squinting, when I have glasses. All right, it says, the righteous perish, and no one takes it to heart. The devout are taken away, and no one understands that the righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. Okay? So how many of y'all ever read Diary of Anne Frank? Anybody read that book? 9th grade, I had to read that book. So Anne Frank is writing from a room that's hidden. I mean, she's behind a wall, hidden because as a Jew, they're being rounded up and taken to internment camps, then on to, these concentration camps and being gassed and being killed. And if you've ever read The Hiding Place with Corrie ten Boom, you know what was happening to women in those places, right? In terms of being raped every day. It was repeated stuff that the guards, and they would laugh about it and do all these terrible, awful things to these people. And so you have this story, and it's about Anne Frank, and it's really a well-written, piece of literary, all that. And we can talk about, oh man, this is great. But in reality, it's a little girl who's 15 years old who's writing, we're hiding because of what's going on in the world, all these terrible things that are happening. And they get discovered. And she gets taken to the internment camp where she dies before she's taken to a concentration camp and has all those things happen and be gassed and all of the things. And we go, 15, a girl that was only 15. And you've heard me say I had a friend that was 16 when she died in a car wreck. A very good friend that got me into the ministry. I still credit her with that. Got me into Young Life. And so we would go, man, that's not fair. Why did that happen? And Isaiah 57:1 is one of those scriptures that we hearken back to go, it was to spare her from being repeatedly violated for years. There were people that were in those camps for years before they were gassed or, because they were being used as sex slave kind of stuff in that. And so sometimes that helps us make sense of some of the things that we've gone through, right? It helps us to try to fathom that a little bit. All right, so let's talk about some other stuff there in terms of how we understand it. Okay, so if I got a better job and moved somewhere, would you all be sad?
Yes.
Okay. If they were paying me double the salary and I had to work half the hours and I got to, make my own hours and would you still be sad? Still be sad, right? But what's best for me and my family? Did you hear the who cares, right? Who cares, right? Do you understand the premise? Okay, so if Bob and I play football together on the high school team or the college team, right? We're in college. We've been recruited by a coach, and we go there and we go, man, I'm so excited for playing for Coach Lesko. Can't wait to be there, right? And we go and we're there, and Coach Lesko comes out, and we're just like, man, every word he says is such good stuff for football. This is such a good team, and we're going to win a lot of games, and I'm going to learn how to play football, and someday I can play in the NFL. And Coach Lesko, after that first year, and we do so well, Coach Lesko goes, guys, I got hired by the Miami Dolphins because they stink, right? Now, you know what I mean? I got hired by the Titans because he's good at what he does, right? Y'all are sitting there going, man, But he gets promoted, he gets a big salary increase, he gets more responsibility, a chance to fame, fortune, all those things. Bob and I are going to sit there and go, what? You're leaving? We're here after just a year. We've just been here. Look, Coach Lesko, no, don't leave. But what's the best thing for Coach Lesko? If we're honest about it. Well, I know. James is going, if he's going to the Titans, it's not the best thing for him, right? But you get the point in that sense, is that you all worked in offices for bosses that you've liked. Every once in a while, you get that kind of job where you're like, man, my boss is so cool, so good. And then what happens? They're so good, they get promoted. And when they get promoted, you get somebody new who stinks. And you go, hey, what just happened here? I love this job, right? I am sad you are gone. But what was the best thing for that guy? He got promoted. And so today I sat with Jimmy and I said, your wife got promoted, right? She fulfilled the purpose that she had here. And we started talking about some of the things. And again, it's not about us working our way to heaven, but it is about us, being the people in the world that God wants us to be. And, when we look at Carmen went from being, she was valedictorian at Culleoka and went and became a nurse. And actually she was a radiology person first, and then a nurse practitioner. And she'd gone back to school each time to do those things. And we go, the one thing that you know about people in that industry, the people who go into that thing, is that they care about other people. Spent their lives walking. Now, guys, some of you all don't understand this. You don't get this. I do. I understand it. Because when you get sick, I come visit you in the hospital and in your home. I try to. I'm being honest with you. I try to. And, there will be people who go, don't do that. You take that home to Jill and your kids and all that kind of stuff. You'll catch it and you'll die, Chris. And yet, we still go into those rooms, and doctors and nurses and all those people, they do that job, and they walk in and they go, put that mask on or that suit, and they go, yeah, I know you've got the bubonic plague, but somebody's got to take care of you, right? Right? In those situations. And so, some of it, we go, she got promoted. And that's, for me, is that if Jill's best friend died at 58 of cancer, and when she's laying there and she can barely speak, and I'm having to lean down and listen to what she said, she goes, ha ha, I beat you to Jesus. Some of the last words that she had. And she got promoted. And we struggle to think of it that way. And it just, in so many different, when we talk about that passage in Ecclesiastes where it says time to be born and a time to die and a time to plant and a time to turn under the ground, is that, think about, Jill and I bought a house, and I've told you this story. We bought it at Christmas, and again, just so you can kind of take it in, we bought that house on December 22nd, which was a Friday at the time, and it was the last day before Christmas that we could close the house deal, and I sat across the table from Mary and Joseph and signed papers. Because that was who was selling us the house. Mary and Joseph was selling us a house on December 22nd, first house that we ever owned. And so, when spring got there, we're talking about a yard that was overgrown because I'm in charge of it. Needed to be mowed, and there are leaves everywhere, and flower beds have got weeds in them and all this kind of stuff. And when spring got there, all these beautiful flowers started coming out. Because Joseph had worked at the University of Tennessee's Agricultural Center, and he had grown all of this stuff, and I didn't do anything. Nothing. Jill didn't do anything. We didn't even turn the hose on and go. We didn't even have a sprinkler going or whatever, right? We didn't do anything, and they still came up. And the first thing that came up were tulips. And Jill and I just stood there, and we went, these are absolutely gorgeous, these flowers that have come up. And I mean, it's like it's candy that's just decorating our flower beds, all these beautiful colors and everything. And how long did those tulips last? Less than 10 days. Less than 10 days. And they went. And they died, right? And I was like, dang, they're already gone. And in the moment, God said, you didn't do anything to make them. You got to enjoy them. But that flower only lasts this long. And some of the flowers that came up and some of the bushes that bloomed, they lasted all spring and summer. And we got to enjoy them for a long time. And that's kind of how family and friends are. Some of them are here for 7 days. And they're beautiful. And that's all the time that we get with them. And some of them are here year-round. Some of them are here and we get to enjoy them all the time. And we don't understand why. And yet God goes, you didn't labor or anything to make them this beautiful. I brought them up as a blessing to you, put them in your life, right? I want us to play the what if game for just a second. Okay? I want to do something because I like for you to be a free thinker. And the people, I'll get heckled for this online by somebody, probably one of my friends from middle school. What if this was the case? Can't prove it with the Bible, right? The one thing that I can tell you is that God has all the answers. He is Alpha and Omega. He was there at the creation, and he'll be there at the end when all things are destroyed, and then there's a new heaven and a new earth that we get, right, at Judgment Day and all those wonderful things that happen. God knows everything. We only know what we can see right now. What we know from hindsight. We don't know what tomorrow holds. Nobody here can say, because we'll plan, Rachel and I'll go, hey, let's all go on vacation. Our families go on vacation. We'll do it next summer. Let's go together. We'll make all these plans and everything. Do we know that any of us are going to make it to next summer? We don't, right? But God has all that information ahead of time. So let's play the what if game for a second. Let's say that God set it up. Doesn't say this in the Bible at all. But what if, like this vase here, this beautiful vase, what if each one of these things are like prayers, and each time one of us gets sick or whatever, for them to get well takes 1,000 prayers, and then you'd be well. What if that was the case? And how much praying are we doing for people when they get sick or before they're sick? And that's just bull. Everything I just said is bull, but it helps me put in perspective how serious I ought to take prayer, right? Because if there's a number and there's a ticker up there and it's going click, 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 and I need 398 to be healed, click, click, click. I want as many people praying as possible to get it to that point. And we don't know, because this is the thing that I'm putting out here for you, is, okay, so we say, that's just bull, and it's one way of us thinking, but what if it just takes one person praying that has faith? Because Jesus says words to us like, "O ye of little faith." And he says, when the man brings his son who's got a demon, he's possessed by a demon, and the disciples haven't been able to cast it out, and he's still rolling around towards the fire and foaming at the mouth and all of that, and Jesus walks up, and the dad goes, "If you could do something, it would be great." And Jesus goes, "If I can do something?" And the guy goes, "Please forgive me for my unbelief." And Jesus says, "Oh, unbelieving generation." And so probably doesn't take 1,000 prayers to get us well or to heal us from this, right? Probably just takes one person believing, right? One person who prays. And remember the disciples last week that we talked about when Peter's in jail and he's in the innermost cell and all that, and they're praying, and he comes to the house after the angel leads him out and all that. He knocks on the door, and what did they say? Rhoda goes, "Hey, Peter's at the door." She didn't let him in, which is hilarious to me. But they go, what is their response? Can't be Peter. Peter's in jail. We watched him he got carried in under guard, and they locked him up. I visited him yesterday, And so do we believe the prayers that we're offering up? Because in the Bible, over and over, it says God is a God of the impossible. All things are possible. I can do all things. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So it's probably not this. It's probably just us believing in what we're praying. Because James 5 says the prayer of a righteous man, and that man word there is human. The prayer of a righteous human is powerful. And, right, he's quoting me King James by there. Availeth much. It's powerful and effective. Right? Both of those. That's two different versions of it's our prayers of a righteous man. And some of us sitting here would say, but I'm not righteous. Yes, you are. By the blood of Jesus, you are righteous. Right? That is how, and when we become Christians, we are made righteous by the blood of Jesus. There is a woman that has been a missionary in Mozambique. Her name's Heidi Baker. You may have seen a video, and there's a book out called Finger of God. And Heidi always talked about that she didn't have much faith. And she had a ministry in Mozambique, and there were the only people who seemed to listen were little kids. And so she had like a ministry to little kids, and they did school and that kind of stuff. And then when somebody would get sick, she would pray over them, and sometimes they'd get well, sometimes they wouldn't. But every time that those kids would go and pray for somebody, it seemed like they got well. And she said, I don't get this. I don't understand. And she said, after a while, I just kind of came to the conclusion that somehow the prayers of a child, whether they're innocent or not, right? We know that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We get that part. But the prayers of little kids, innocent little kids, gets the ear of God. Okay? Let the little children come to me. And he says to us, become like little children. You know what that means? Like Jill. Jill believes everything that's in the Bible. She doesn't sit. I can sit there on the couch as a seminarian and theologian and go, Jill, tell me what you think about this. And she goes, I just believe it. It's what it says. Jesus said it, good enough for me. And I go, amen, sister. That's what kids do. Did you tell kids and you go, hey, God shut the mouths of the lions and Daniel was not eaten or whatever, right? I had a seminary professor who had the gall with me paying him whatever, $20,000 a year to go to Vanderbilt. And he had the gall to stand up there and go, when Jesus fed the 5,000, and by the way, he talked with an accent, so I'm not going to mock the man. But he said, what actually happened in that situation, because all of that miraculous stuff is garbage, and then science and reason and logic can tell you that all that's garbage, is that Jesus had food hidden in a cave somewhere. And he sent his disciples to go get the food out of the cave and brought it out and fed 5,000 people. And I went, they're paying you to be here? You're actually on staff. You're employed here as a New Testament professor? They think you're a smart man? And yet, right? We have to be like little children who go, Jesus told me to do this, to pray in Jesus' name and believe it, and it would be done. Do you believe that? Because I share with you stories from missionaries, and all of us would sit here and go, Chris, why do you read all those missionary books? Because those people are afraid they're going to be killed at any moment, and they have no source of income. They have nobody that's supporting them, and they are out in the field trying to share the message of Jesus Christ. And in those moments, you are most likely to be on your knees before God going, I got nobody to turn to, Lord. It's just you. You know, I need protection. I need money. I need, to put somebody in my path that I can talk to. I need the language. I don't speak this language, whatever it might be. And it's those people who see the moving of God. Because he is living and active, and he is intervening in this world all over the place. And for many of us, we go, no, he's got food hidden over there in a cave. That's the miracles that Jesus is doing. Right? And we go, oh, my goodness. One last thing. And this is the hardest thing. I can't say this to somebody's face. But let's say Selah gets sick and she passes away next week. No, I'm just saying, it could be me. I don't care. Say it's me. But I'm using Selah for a reason. If Selah were to get sick and pass away, she beat me to Jesus. But here's one thing that you need to take into account. Isaiah 57 was said to spare them from evil. What if 3 weeks from now, while she was in the parking garage getting in her car, somebody abducted her and took her and raped her? And she spent the rest of her life hating and being angry and wanting revenge and just crippled emotionally. Would that be okay that God went ahead and took her home so that she didn't have to do that? Or what if God took me home in 3 weeks because he knew that I was going to be on my cell phone with my daughter or one of my sons in the car or one of my grandkids in the car, and that I did something stupid and negligent and I got us into a wreck where they died, and that would cripple me emotionally and make me into a basket case for the rest of my life? And that, right? Is that sometimes we don't like to think of those kind of things. We're just like, oh, no, you're going to, Chris, you're being superstitious. I don't want to hear any of that stuff or whatever. But in reality, if I'm getting ready to go to a concentration camp and God takes me, then, man, he's loving. And I want you to know that God has all the information. And when we think that he's being unfair, he can see everything, and we can only see right now in the midst of the grieving. And so, for us, when we look at all these wonderful stories, I want you to, Helen Roseveare, and we'll end right here. We're out of time. I want to share this with you because it's actually her, and she's a missionary. She was there for decades in Congo, in Africa, and so it says that she was taken captive, taken hostage by this group, that she was smacked, beaten, and she said that she was with a bunch of nuns that were captive from a Catholic mission that was there, and that those nuns were being killed off a few at a time. They would take them out away from everybody, and they would never return. And she was in this truck, and they kept moving from place to place. And she says, all Helen knew was that they were being transferred north to Mungberry, about 100 miles away. However, not long after midnight, the truck pulled off the road at Batongwe, a tiny settlement about 25 miles from Mungberry. Helen wondered why they had stopped. This place belonged to the Belgian planter I knew, one of the nuns whispered. Get down, one of the guards yelled. Get out of the truck now. Why? Helen asked. What is here? Can't we go on to Mungberry? The Siamba fighter struck her. She climbed down from the truck. When the women had climbed out of the truck, they were led to a large bungalow set back a little from the road. Inside, they were told to sit down on the concrete floor with their backs to the wall. All they had was one hurricane lantern to light the room. News soon got around Batongwe that a group of white women were at the bungalow. At dawn, a mob of local men and women gathered outside the house, jeering and thumping on the doors. Helen was sure that this was the end for them all. However, the Siamba sergeant major in charge of the area arrived with several guards and forced the crowd back before they could do anything. To Helen's surprise, the sergeant major seemed like an honorable man, even though he's part of this is a rebellion group that's killed tons of people. He left the guards posted at the bungalow while he went to organize some food for the women. It says, Helen slept little that night, and by the time the sun came up, she felt on the verge of a mental and physical collapse. She didn't know how much more she could take of not knowing if she would be alive by the time the sun set. Helen wasn't sure what time it was, perhaps an hour after sunrise, when a new group of Simba guards arrived to watch over them. These new guards were not as disciplined as those who watched them through the night. Before she could properly assess how they should react to the new guards, the bungalow reverberated with the sound of airplanes and several thunderous blasts. The Simba guards became agitated. Then they began forcing the captives back into the main room of the bungalow. It was easy for Helen to see the Simbas were scared. As the sounds of aircraft and explosions continued, the Simba guards forced them all into a smaller room. Helen was on high alert. The situation was that the most volatile yet. The Simbas were out of control. Helen was sure that if one Simba fired his gun, they would all open fire and the prisoners would be dead within seconds. Then Helen heard another sound, the sound of revving engines and vehicles traveling at high speed, accompanied by a rhythmic pop, pop, pop sound. A machine gun, one of the captives gasped. At the word machine gun, Helen saw the fear in the Simba's eyes grow. Again, they seemed to have no idea how they should respond. Unexpectedly, they turned and fled from the bungalow. Outside, Helen could hear the machine gun fire pick up. Get down, flat on the floor! Exclamation mark. She yelled. Simba screamed and shouted outside. Helen heard the truck and jeep engines grow closer. She heard more gunfire and then the sound of the boots of men rushing toward the bungalow. Moments later, the door was kicked down. Men with rifles in hand stood ready to fire. But they were white men, foreign mercenaries. The captives were safe. Tears streamed down Helen's cheeks. She could barely believe it. She had been ready to die at the hands of the Simbas, but now here she was, surrounded by men who had come to rescue her and the others. Why did she get spared? Those are the questions that we ask. Those are the things we struggle with. And hopefully over the next few weeks, we can kind of make sense of all of that in knowing that God is at work. And when I say this, is that when you're not functioning as a Christian, there's very little satanic opposition to you. He kind of looks at you, I believe, Satan does, and goes, okay, you're messing your own life up with all your own sins, so I don't really have to do a whole lot. You're kind of taking care of it for me. But as soon as you go, Lord, I'm on your side and I'm willing to do what you want me to do, send me out and produce fruit, that's when Satan takes that it says that he prowls the earth like a roaring lion, right? Looking for somebody to devour. And in those moments, he comes after us. And it's, I sit there and I use that list of all those things that I read to you to go, I am so thankful each morning that God protected me, that God watched out for me when I couldn't watch out for myself, when he, in those situations, protected me. And there are a million times where I have walked down a dark street or gone into a parking garage or I've come out of a building or whatever, and somebody could have hurt me that I never saw. Something, poisoned me or whatever, shot me, whatever it might be, and he's protected me and I never even knew it. Cars that have missed me, whatever, walking through. I have been in creeks up to my knees, walking, picking up rocks, turning them over to pick up crawdads and everything for miles, and never bitten by a snake. Okay, so keep in mind all that God does without you even knowing it. And that should create within us the thankful and grateful hearts that he desires. We'll stop there for tonight. God bless you all. Thank you for joining us. Have a blessed evening.